Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are continuing on the conversation about the NBA Finals, which tip off tomorrow night. And before we actually get these games, I do want to do a little bit of a preview here and talk about the top 10 players in the NBA Finals in my eyes. Now, keep in mind, ranking players can be extremely subjective, so this is ultimately, I think I'm considering a little bit of my expectations for this series in particular, but there is some aspect of pedigree as well with these players, so definitely give us your thoughts in the comments section. But without further ado here, number 10, I have Al Horford, and this is, again, a little bit of an example of pedigree where Al Horford, we've seen him come through in big moments for the Celtics for a number of these years that they have been able to make these runs to the conference finals and even the NBA finals. And there have absolutely been times during this postseason where it's looked like he is old and sort of, especially in that pick and roll defense when he gets switched on to smaller, quicker guards, he's been having a very hard time. Now, that is absolutely still a possibility that could come into play in this series, but we talked about this before. Luka Doncic, and maybe we'll see if Kyrie has something to say about that, even though he hasn't been quite as aggressive in the pick and roll in my eyes. But for Luka, I do think that Al has at least a little bit more of sort of I definitely wouldn't call it an advantage, but he can at least hold up a little bit better against Luka in some of these instances, because we see Luka, when he does have a little bit, he can sort of work through length and, skinny defenders somewhat at ease. I mean, that just goes to show how great Luka is. But, Jaden McDaniels, an all defensive caliber player, doesn't really have the body type necessarily to shut down Luka, and we saw that in the Western Conference Finals. So Al Horford, there is a chance that he could find himself getting exposed to some degree, but I do have, faith that he is going to have at least one or two big moments in this series. So 10, didn't feel great about that. It was between him and Derrick Jones Jr. really for me, but I have them both behind number 9 in PJ Washington, who, with PJ, you look at sort of the transformation that he's had. I have sort of compared it some to the way that we have viewed Aaron Gordon in comparison to when he was with Orlando, when he showed some flashes. He had a little bit of, pedigree coming into the NBA, going to a high major school, and being drafted in the first round. I believe they were both lottery picks. I forget if PJ was bordering on lottery or not, but ultimately they showed a lot of promise in individual skill sets, but it was never enough to carry a middling team, which was both the situation with Aaron Gordon in Orlando and PJ Washington with Charlotte. And now that he is in this new role, he has been phenomenal for the Mavericks. Now, I know the shooting splits from the Western Conference Finals were not great, but at the same time, we saw him, despite the bad shooting numbers, hit the big shots, play some incredible defense, and I'm going to be curious to see. Like I mentioned, there may be sets where the Dallas Mavericks might go a little bit smaller if Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford are being forced out onto the perimeter defensively and are having a little bit more trouble. I wonder if we see some PJ Washington minutes at the 5. We saw it briefly in that Oklahoma City Thunder series as well in the Western Conference semifinals. So that's something that, you could keep an eye out for. But regardless of what position PJ Washington is playing, he's going to give you really high energy, good defense, and be at least a threat from the three-point line, preferably for him more so in the corner than above the break. But going to be interesting to see for the Celtics how they choose to, what their philosophy is going to be in terms of allowing him to shoot from the perimeter. Number 8, I have Derek Lively. Lively has been a phenomenal force for the Mavericks, and I know that, he has been playing less minutes than PJ Washington for a lot of this postseason run. and he doesn't necessarily provide any spacing. I was going to say the same spacing, but really any at all. But the impact that he's had on these games is tremendous. Now, a lot of people, when they've been making these types of rankings, have him even higher. I do want to maybe hold back on that a little bit. Lively should, as I mentioned, with the spacing of Porzingis, possibly with Horford as well, be tested a little bit more in a postseason series for the first time in terms of being asked to guard around the perimeter. How does that impact his game? Because he and Gafford, the platoon of them in the paint, has been tremendous for the Mavericks throughout this run, but Derek Lively, there's just a lot of unproven with him still, and he's had a phenomenal run, especially for a rookie here, but I think it's just going to be different looks, and I sort of struggle if I'm picking which players in the series I would like to, throw out there for just this particular series. Lively does fall maybe a little bit more than some other people see him as, but let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are on that. Number 7, I have Derek White. This might even, I feel like this area here, when you're talking about 8 to 5, can be, a lot of these are just very quality role players. They fit in and they give you exactly what you need. I feel like, even as I'm doing this, the Derek White at 7 is possibly a little bit low, but at the same time, Derek White, there is no bad things you can really say about his game. The one concern I have for him in this series is the Celtics don't necessarily have anybody you can pick on defensively, but I could absolutely see the Celtics with their switch-heavy defense, Luka Doncic probably trying to hunt Derek White the most, I would say, where we saw Derek, he still holds up well against bigger defenders in comparison to the majority of players in the NBA that are his size, but in those moments, and we're talking Miles Turner right now, who's a 7-footer, but that's where we saw Drew Holiday sort of be able to come up in those instances, and Miles Turner, again, it's not to Derek White's fault at all, guarding a 7-footer as a guard in the post. We've seen Derek White be incredibly effective as a post defender this season, but I do think that there is one little bit of a sort of area in which he could maybe be exposed a little bit more. But let me know if you think that I have him too low in the comments section. Obviously, the analytics guys absolutely love Derek White, so maybe that community is going to disagree with this take. Number 6, I have Kristaps Porzingis, somebody that is incredibly hard to rank in this form because of the fact that we haven't seen him in about a month. I think it's over a month at this point. It was game 4 of the Miami Heat series that he went down during the first half, and we don't necessarily know what he is going to be able to bring in this instance, but at the same time, everything I have highlighted, he should be somebody that, as long as he's fully ready to go, does serve as a little bit of a mismatch and gives the Mavericks less options to sort of, on both sides of the ball, try and scheme their way around a very talented Celtics starting lineup. So I have Porzingis at 6 here. Number 5, I have Drew Holiday. I believe when I did my top 10 players in the conference finals, I had Kristaps Porzingis at 10 with the possibility that he could come back, and in the time that he was out, Drew Holiday was an absolute stud in the Eastern Conference Finals with the aggression on offense. Like I mentioned before, he was going at Tyrese Halliburton, converting himself to a little bit of a more primary offensive option for them, especially in that fourth quarter of Game 3 to keep them alive, along with the fact that, he had the game-sealing plays in a couple of those as well, with Game 3 getting the steal against Andrew Nembhard. Also did a tremendous job just in general against a very hot Nembhard in that matchup in Game 3, and then he also had the crucial offensive rebound in Game 4 that ultimately sealed it for the Celtics. So Jrue Holiday, one of the two players in this finals that has a ring to his name already, and he is looking to further establish himself as a potential Hall of Famer. Number 4, I have Kyrie Irving, the man himself who has been able to transform his public reputation and has had this incredible redemption arc. Now, there are conversations that people are throwing out there about Kyrie Irving could even be better than Jason Tatum. Isaiah Thomas, former Celtic, even said that on a podcast with DeMarcus Cousins recently. I don't think I'm ready to go that far. I mean, Kyrie Irving, as much as it has been incredible for him in this postseason run, and I think, even beyond counting stats, the way that he has been a leader, the way that he has been able to be a floor general on the court, again, whether or not it goes down as an official assist or not, he has done such a good job of consistently making the right plays for Dallas all the way throughout here. But at the same time, you do look at the overall outputs for him, and he was really great in this Western Conference Finals, and he is going to be a Hall of Famer. It's tough when you're talking about multiple All-NBA caliber players all in this series. There's a lot of stars, but you would forget, based off of the way that he's talked about, that Kyrie averaged just under 16 points per game in the second round, and there were concerns a little bit in terms of him not being quite as aggressive as they need, and ultimately they're in this position, so I absolutely don't want to hold that against him. But that's why when I look at number 3, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, Jaylen Brown, I still don't think that he necessarily gets the credit that he deserves. Now, granted, played an Indiana Pacers team last round that was a little bit of a turnstile in terms of allowing the team defense in general, and the way that anybody was able to get to the paint on them all season long. That's where Jaylen did a lot of his damage. An efficient, just under 30 point per game average in the Eastern Conference Finals, along with incredible defense on the other end as well. Again, you're talking about two stars in comparison to Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brown, but I expect a big series out of Jaylen Brown. We consistently see him getting these favorable matchups because of number 2, Jason Tatum. As much as everybody consistently puts him down, Tatum draws that extra attention, and Brown is the star that's able to convert on the opportunities that are opened up because of the fact that Tatum draws that level of attention. And Tatum, we talked about it at length yesterday. I really don't believe that there is a flaw in his game. Now, if you want to talk shot selection and some of the efficiency from the three-point line, I will definitely hear you out on that. I think that it's probably more of a mental error than anything else, but in terms of talent, I don't think that there's anything on the court that he can't do. He is the best rebounder on the Celtics. He's one of the best rebounding non-centers in the league. I want to say Julius Randle was possibly, this is off the top of my head, so definitely be sure to correct me on the spot, but I believe that he was the best rebounding non-center in the NBA this season. I'm considering Sabonis a center. That's where he played for the most part this year, if that was going to be a rebuttal from anybody. But that being said, as much as I don't think that Jason Tatum has a flaw, we're talking about the best players in the world and the ability to elevate to that next level, and that's where Luka Doncic comes into play. And I find it really hard to, put anybody over Luka in terms of, especially when it comes down to those crunch time minutes. There isn't a shot that Luka can't get to, and it feels like just about every one that he puts up is going to go in. He is not the defensive liability that he was once thought of. I've talked about throughout this postseason run. He gets a lot of love for his defense now. I do still think that there are lapses from him that don't make him, an impeccable defender, but I've talked to Celtics fans ahead of this series and they say, oh, well, let's just try and expose Luka in an ISO situation. That's not necessarily a part of what you can do anymore. Now, if you want to ISO him to maybe try and tire him out, we know that his conditioning isn't necessarily elite. It's still not this easy solution that I think that a lot of people who aren't fully tuned into the Luka Doncic experience are aware of. But this is my top 10 list of players in the NBA Finals. Be sure to use the comments section. Give us your critiques of this list, what you agree, disagree with, and such. But we are going to be taking our next break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we have some developments with the Los Angeles Lakers and their head coaching search. It sounds like they are zeroing in on one favorite from a national media perspective, so we are going to dive into that. But first, this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.